Hidden Frontlines, the prisoners who saw tomorrow. What happens when the world you were ready to die for turns out to be a lie? When the enemy you were taught to despise offers you a hamburger, letting the absurdity hang in the air. This is not a story of a battle with bullets, but a war of ideas. A war fought not in the deserts of Africa, but in the minds of hardened Nazi soldiers. And their prison camp? It turned out to be the most shocking classroom imaginable. The overwhelming, abundant, and downright confusing heartland of America. Act 1. The Aftermath of Defeat. The First Cracks. May 13th, 1943. Tunisia. The air is thick with the taste of defeat, a cocktail of dust, cordite, and despair. The Afrika Korps, the only proud legions of the Desert Fox, are surrendering en masse. Nearly 275,000 men. Among them is Feldwebel Friedrich Radke. Think of him, a holder of the Iron Cross, a veteran of the Blitzkrieg, a man who saw the Eiffel Tower from the turret of his Panzer, a true believer. His war of movement is over, but his war of perception is just kicking into gear. The first lesson? American efficiency. And let me tell you, it was terrifying in its own way. Slight chuckle. The transit camps at Oran, Algeria weren't the chaotic hellholes they expected. They were, well-oiled machines. ID cards photographed and filed faster than you could say Heil Hitler. Medical exams, inoculations, and the Geneva Convention explained to them in fluent German. It was disorienting. It's like showing up for a fist fight and the other guy hands you a contract and a pen. You don't know whether to punch him or sign. And then, the food arrived. Laugh of disbelief. White bread, real coffee, meat. Not just a one-time look how nice we are stunt, but twice a day, every day. The prisoners were convinced it was a grand, elaborate prank. They're fattening us up for something terrible, they whispered. They were like suspicious cats being offered gourmet tuna. They couldn't process the simple, terrifying truth. This was just Tuesday for the U.S. Army. But the real main melter was yet to come. The second lesson arrived not from a man, but from a miracle of engineering, a ship that should not have existed. The Liberty ships. The SS Robert E. Peary, the vessel that would carry Radke and thousands of others across the Atlantic, was built in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Pause for effect. Let me say that again. 4 days. In the time it took a German factory to argue about paperwork and allocate resources, the Americans had designed, built, and launched a 10,000-ton ocean-going vessel. It's the industrial equivalent of a guy challenging you to a sprint while he's tying his shoes and still finishing a mile ahead of you. For 2 weeks, these hardened veterans of the Wehrmacht crossed the Atlantic, and they watched. And what they saw chipped away at their reality more effectively than any artillery barrage. Waste. Slow, deliberate. They saw half-eaten steaks thrown overboard, whole loaves of bread tossed, gallons of milk poured out. To men from a Reich where a single potato was a treasure, this was heresy. It was like a parable I once heard. A king, to prove his wealth, doesn't just show you his gold. He throws a handful of coins into the river just to hear the splash. That careless splash was the first crack in the foundation of everything they knew. So put yourself in their boots. Your entire worldview is built on your nation's superiority, and the first concrete evidence you see is your enemy treating steak like it's worthless. What's the first thought that breaks through the propaganda? Type it in the comments below. Act 2. The Unveiling, a Nation of Miracles. August 2nd, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Sound of awe. If the Liberty ship was a crack, Norfolk was the entire dam breaking. The port was a sprawling, chaotic, magnificent city of ships. Cranes stood like mechanical gods, moving mountains of cargo. Obergefreiter Johann Weber, a factory worker from the industrial Ruhr, counted 47 ships from his spot on the dock. In a single day, this one port handled more tonnage than all of Hamburg managed in a week. It was like a village blacksmith walking into a Detroit assembly line, his brain simply short-circuited. But the true personal and almost funny shock came next. The march to the trains. They passed parking lots filled with cars. For dock workers, for ordinary laborers. In Germany, the Volkswagen, or people's car, was a cruel joke, a radio announcement, and a savings stamp book. Here, it was just what you drove to work. It's like being promised a flying car your whole life and then arriving in a city where everyone has one and uses it to take out the trash. And then, the trains. Chuckle of disbelief. Not the infamous 40 and 8 boxcars, 40 men or 8 horses, that had carried them to the front. No, these were sleek silver Pullman coaches, padded seats, dining cars with tablecloths, observation decks. Feldwebel Radke wrote in his diary, and I quote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." But the moment that truly defined the absurd new reality was an apology. An American sergeant apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly. Air conditioning. In August, a technology most of them believed was science fiction reserved for Hitler's personal train, and here an enemy was apologizing for its absence. It was the ultimate flex. The psychological demolition was not just underway, it was being conducted by polite, slightly apologetic engineers. Act 3. The Heart of the Arsenal. The American Dream in Technicolor. For 3 days, the train rolled west, and America unfolded outside their windows like a dream. And as night fell, they witnessed the impossible. An entire nation was lit up. Every town, every street corner, every farmhouse, it was all blazing with electric light. In Germany, the night was a thing of fear, of blackout curtains and air raid sirens. Here, the night was a celebration. Light flowed like water. This was the Tennessee Valley Authority, not a policy, but a fact, a brilliant, undeniable fact. The guards said this was normal, that every American town had electricity since the 1920s. One prisoner, Obergefreiter Hans Meyer, a loyal Nazi, called a guard a liar. The guard just shrugged and said, "You'll see." It's the kind of quiet confidence that's more devastating than any argument. Then the factories rose out of the landscape. They passed the Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee. It stretched for 3 miles. Its electric furnaces consumed more power than the entire city of Munich. Imagine that, a single factory eating more electricity than a cultural capital of Europe. It's a parable of 2 kingdoms, one that hoards its candles, and one that builds bonfires so large they can be seen from space. Near Detroit, the train slowed, and they glimpsed the Willow Run plant, a single factory that produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes, one every hour. A fully equipped, 4-engined heavy bomber rolling off the line like it was a toy from a cereal box. Feldwebel Werner, a Luftwaffe pilot, pressed his face to the window. He'd been told American planes were made of cardboard and wishes. He later wrote, "I could see the precision, the quality. These were not inferior aircraft. They were simply built faster than we could imagine possible. It was like watching someone solve a Rubik's Cube in 3 seconds. You're not just impressed, you're questioning your own understanding of the universe." And the food, the endless, terrifying, glorious food. They crossed the Mississippi. Below them, barges carried more grain than the entire German harvest of 1942. Ungefriedter Karl Schmidt, a farmer's son, wrote, "The Americans transport food as we transport ammunition, in endless quantities, without concern for loss."
At a stop in Kansas City, a guard bought 20 hamburgers. He paid with a single dollar bill, without a thought. For men on a 200-gram-a-week meat ration, this was less a meal and more a religious revelation. This was not special. This, they were told, was normal. The most powerful propaganda was a simple hamburger. Act 4. A strange and benevolent captivity, the comfortable cage. Camp Hearn, Texas, their new home. It was not a prison. It was, and I'm not exaggerating, a better appointed town than most of them had left in Germany. Wooden barracks with electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers. It was like being sentenced to a moderately pleasant summer camp. The camp hospital was the next shock to the system. Oberststabsarzt Dr. Friedrich Bauer found himself in a facility with X-ray machines, modern surgical equipment, and penicillin. Penicillin, the miracle drug. In Germany, it was a rumor, a whispered hope. Here, the Americans slapped it on a POW's minor infection like it was bacitracin. German soldiers were dying for want of sulfur drugs at the front, and the Yanks were using their top-tier medicine on their enemies. It was an act of such casual, overwhelming superiority, it was humiliating. The camp kitchen was the final nail in the coffin of their old beliefs. Walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers. The daily ration was fresh milk, eggs, meat. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich, wrote the line that still echoes, "Today, we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. Not spoiled food, simply excess." He ended his entry, "I wept as I threw perfectly good bread into the garbage." They thought they had been captured by an enemy. They were starting to realize they'd been enrolled in a very strange, very well-funded university. And soon, they'd be sent out on field trips that would blow their minds wide open. Act 5. Classrooms in the Heartland. The Gospel of Plenty. By September 1943, America needed workers. And so the POWs were sent out to labor in the fields and factories. This wasn't a punishment. It was the final phase of their re-education, a doctorate in American abundance. In the sugar beet fields of Nebraska, they saw a single combine harvester do the work of 100 men. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote, "The farmer's son, a boy of 16, drove a tractor worth more than everything my father had earned in his lifetime." When I mentioned this, the boy laughed and said it wasn't even a particularly good tractor. The casualness of it was the real insult. In a Campbell soup factory in New Jersey, they saw automation that bordered on magic. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Wagner documented, "One elderly woman monitored controls that managed what would have required 50 workers in Germany. She did this while listening to a radio and drinking coffee. It was efficiency so advanced, it looked like laziness." But the most psychologically complex moment came in California. The sound of a bulldozer engine starting, a harsh, grating noise. They saw mountains of oranges, perfectly edible oranges, being bulldozed into pits, destroyed to maintain prices. For men from a continent where children were starving, this was a moral outrage. It was also the ultimate flex. Gefreiter Otto Schultz wrote, "We begged to be allowed to send them to our families. The guards were sympathetic, but explained it was impossible." This calculated waste was America's way of saying, our problem isn't making enough,
Our problem is making too much. Now here's a question for you. Was this display of overwhelming abundance a form of psychological warfare? Or was it just America being America? And which is more terrifying to an ideology built on scarcity? Let me know what you think.
Act 6. The unarming of the mind. Kindness as a weapon. Christmas 1943. The final decisive blow to Nazi ideology didn't come from a factory. It came from a small Methodist church in Hearne, Texas, singing Silent Night to its enemies. American groups sent 500,000 Christmas packages to the POWs, to the men who had been trying to kill their sons. There were cigarettes, candy, and handmade cards from Boy Scouts. This wasn't propaganda. This was just kindness. And for men steeped in the harshness of Nazism, it was the most disarming weapon of all. Oberlieutenant Walter Mueller, whose brother had died in the bombing of Hamburg, wrote, "They know we are their enemies, yet they show us this kindness. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory." The Christmas feast was a spectacle. Turkey, ham, pies, ice cream. They ate until they were sick, physically unable to process the reality of such a feast being given to prisoners. And then the Americans, like benevolent professors, opened the classrooms. The re-education program began, and the prisoners, their defenses gone, were ravenous. They studied English, history, and democracy. They read uncensored newspapers. They saw Hollywood films like Gone with the Wind and The Grapes of Wrath. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote, "Amazed, they hide nothing. They show their problems, their failures. In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here, it is considered patriotic." When the D-Day newsreels were shown, they saw the final exam of the system they'd been studying. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft. It was the logical, inevitable conclusion of the Liberty ships and the Willow Run plants. The war in their minds was over. The truth had won.
Act 7. The Reckoning. The Terrible Mirror. Then came the spring of 1945, and the final, terrible lecture. The Americans showed them the newsreels from the liberated concentration camps, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald. Many screamed, "Lügenpresse," lying press. They denied it, they fought it. But the evidence was a tidal wave. This was no longer about industrial might or hamburgers. This was about the moral core of the cause for which they had fought. This was the ultimate devastation. Feldwebel Walter Schmidt wrote the epitaph for their entire generation. "We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples. We found that we were the barbarians." Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German POWs were sent home. They returned to a nation in ashes. But they carried something priceless in their minds: blueprints. Blueprints for a new Germany, drawn from the most unlikely source: the compassion and efficiency of their American captors. Act 8. Redemption. The Witnesses Return. 1985, Austin, Texas. A reunion that would have been unthinkable 40 years prior. Over 500 former POWs returned, not as enemies, but as friends, as grateful witnesses. They hugged their former guards. They told stories. They were living proof of one of history's greatest transformations. The keynote speaker was former Lieutenant Hermann Guths, now 78. He stood at the podium, a man who had completed the journey from Nazi to Democrat. His voice was strong. He said, "We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from hatred, but from diversity, not from tyranny, but from freedom. We witnessed the arsenal of democracy, and we learned that America's true weapon was not its bombs, but its unshakable confidence to be kind. We returned to Germany with a mission to build a society that could create rather than destroy. The Germany that rose from the ashes was built in classrooms in Texas and Nebraska. The story of these German POWs is a victory won not with tanks, but with tractors, not with bullets, but with bread. It was a victory of light over darkness in the most literal sense. They were stunned by American industrial might, but they were ultimately converted by American idealism, served up with a side of shocking humanity. Their journey proves a profound truth, that the most powerful weapon is the capacity to create, that the most convincing argument is a well-lit street, a full stomach, and a hand extended not in victory, but in simple, decent respect. It's a story that asks us a question, even today. What builds a better world? The power to destroy your enemies, or the power to amaze them into becoming your friends? If you love uncovering the stories history forgot, the tales that change how we see the world, subscribe to Hidden Frontlines, because every shadow has a story. Hidden Frontlines, bringing forgotten courage back to life.